Bonsoir. I would like to thank the organizing committee for accepting my paper and for the whole hospitality. I'm familiar on this archival material exactly because of my research for my PhD dissertation and because of my involvement in the ultimate process for the organization of it. As Superintendente Pier Paolo Dorsi stressed on the evening of the presentation of the final organization of the archive in 2013, this material does not only reflect the events of the community, but during the 2 centuries, almost two centuries, which the material covers, but also the history of the city, during which the Greek community had contributed, together with other religious communities, to the social, cultural, economical evolution of Trieste. A city extended to the sea as a motivation of its very existence and as an element toward islands, coasts, places of the Mediterranean Sea, from which also Greeks came from, maintaining an emotional and economic relations. The presence and the settlement of Greeks, as well as of other foreign merchants in Trieste, was linked to the financial opportunities that were promised by the city's declaration as a Porto Franco and 1719, and also by the Austrian policy of religious tolerance. Until the late 18th century, the places of origin of the Greeks was mainly the Ionian Islands, the Peloponnese, Epirus, Missolonghi. Nevertheless, the enrichment opportunities brought by the free port gradually attract more people from Smyrna, Crete, Chios, and Cyprus. In 1751, Maria Teresa was granting by imperial diploma to the Orthodox Greci, dati al rito della Chiesa orientale, who wished to settle in the port and grow their business, the right to build a temple where they could freely practice their religion. This privilege was granted to Greeks by descent and also Illyrians, Serbi, from Dalmatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina, who were captains and ship owners. The church, dedicated all'Annunziazione San Spiridione, was built along the Canal Grande at the same place where the church of the Serbian community is today, under the same name. What followed the inauguration of the church in 1753 was the formation of a fraternity and the composition of a charter. Later on, the Russo-Turkish War favored an increase in the number of Greeks who outnumbered the Illyrians considerably. The latter, regardless of their small number, had a stronger financial presence those years, which allowed them to be treated in a more favorable manner by the authorities in their discord with the Greeks over the language of the liturgy and the election of a Serb priest next to the Greek. The growing tension between them reached its peak and led to a final rift in 1781 when the Greeks left the church. During the same year, the Emperor Joseph II, succeeded his mother, launched a new series of reform in the spirit of enlightened absolutism and issued the Editto di Tolleranza and later on a decree concerning the non-Catholic communities. In that political climate, the former futile efforts of the Greeks finally paid off, and they were granted by imperial decree of the 9th of August 1782 the right to build a new temple. The consolidation of the Greek community also resulted from the reflected demographic and financial prosperity that the Greek community had reached by the late 18th, early 19th century, having monopolized the trade with Levante. In 1786, the authorities verified the constitution of the community, propriamente Greca, and in the next year, the first statutory meeting takes place and the first service is held at the Holy Trinity San Nicolas Greek Orthodox Church, which was built on the seashore in Riva al Mare. The hall della Cancelleria della Comunità was located on the first level of the building next to the church, property of the community from 1792. The meeting hall remained the same despite the continuous restoration works of the building. The hall has still access to a smaller room they had built in 1794, lined with iron in a flame-resistant manner, casa di ferro, which was used for the safekeeping of the money box, various valuables, and of course the memorandum, articles of association, register records, and other archival material frequently used and consulted by the members of the capitolo, which is the council, and the president. Indeed, the intention of gathering and preservation of archival material is expressed in the Statuto, Constitution of the community. Among the responsibilities of the priests was to keep the register of births, christenings, deaths, and marriages, recording dates, names, and what else was necessary for each entry to be as accurate as possible, and to hand the register to the capitolo, to the council, at the end of each year, per effetto che siano conservati, to be conserved nel pubblico archivio nazionale, nazionale is the community. The term pubblico appears to have a double meaning, that it was public property of the nazione and it was freely accessible to be consulted, while the Greek rendering of the term, grammatophylakia, emphasizes more on the existence of a particular space used for safekeeping. The increase of cases of administrative and ecclesiastical nature in the community mandated the institutionalization of the figure of chancellor, cancelliere. The chancellor would often be surrounded by assistants. However, due to negligence or illness of the staff, there was an occasional disorder in the record keeping, especially of the register which remained unrecorded from 1860. The gaps were causing a number of problems to the daily affairs, financial or administrative, of the community. In 1876, the president was informing the capitolo that, following instructions from Bozza, the lawyer at that time in service of the community, the archive had started keeping the register on a regular basis and that the gaps had been filled in. We don't know exactly the extent of Bozza's contribution to this process. Nevertheless, as we read in the Acts of the community, he worked with great care to compose the 40-page bilingual Historikis Diigisis, which was printed by the presidency for the first anniversary of the 100 anni. Of the foundation of the community, which was distributed to colleagues and to the authorities. In his preface, we read that it is a brief narrative of community life since the foundation of the community until 1880, in memory of its founders and benefactors, based on contemporary historical dissertations and on the acts and documents of the community. The narration starts with the presence of the first Greek inhabitants, the events that brought about the separation from the Serbs, and continues with a review of the activity of the community and of its most important representatives over these years. This short narration was the first attempt of recounting the community's past, based partly on its very archival material, as a close reading of traditions, ως μια πιστή ανάγνωση των παραδόσεων. That was the answer of those who supported this edition to those who doubted it as a usefulness and its making doubting about its reliability, adding that now they would not need to visit the city's archives in person each time they needed to be informed about something. While the informative value of the archival material was being acknowledged, the very process of recounting and remembering the past fed the need of organizing the archive as a proof of the past and to keep the memory alive. Margaritis Konstantinidis, later on, will work more consciously in the direction of preserving and utilizing archival evidence for the purposes of history. Konstantinidis served as a secretary of the community between 1891 and 1970s, during which he studied the history of the community up to 1821 and was publishing the results of his research to the Novo Giorno, a Greek newspaper of Trieste. He was the first who undertook a systematic organization of the documents of the archive of the community from the first years, 1751 up to 1883, proceeding to a chronological and later to a thematic classification in folders, and produced indices for these documents in 2 volumes, where he wrote the date, entry number, and the description of each document. In addition, he ensured the continuity of the evidence by copying into registers the acts and other documents of the period before the separation by the Serbs. Those documents had been left behind after the rift with the Illyrians. This last action of Constantinidis came after 97, when in his letter to the president of the community, the chief of the National Library in Athens, request to be offered to the National Library material that was housed at the library and archive of the community. It was namely 33 manuscript codices, pilot tapes published by Aldo Manuzio, and documents, the donation of which would not cause problems, as it was referred to the later. For example, letters of former teachers and other persons with considerable national activity, whose names, as we read, had already been or would be immortalized by the history of our nation. «Ον τα ονόματα αποθανάτησε, ή μέλη να αποθανατήσει η ιστορία του ημετέρου έθνους», for the benefit and the enrichment of the National Library collections. Among the aims of the members of Capitolo was to staff the school with notable teachers who came from the wider area of Greece and of Greek communities, and later from the heart of the Greek state, which also explains the invitation of eminent Greek scholars. The function of the school was directly linked to the existence of the library, which, through the works left by the erudite teachers, purchases, and donations, became one of the most important rich library of the Greek diaspora. The National Library's offer was clearly part of its continuous efforts for acquiring parts of government, legal, community, and private archives and libraries as the fruits of national scholarship and intellect. Indeed, although the chief librarian invokes patriotic feelings to commissars and members of the Capitolo, they unanimously declined to offer in order to show respect in the memory of the donors and members of the community, essentially denying to expropriate the proofs of the very own, not national, but we can say diasporal past. In the years that followed, we have no notice about the archive. During the Second World period, in fear of bombings, they will protect the documents in the shelter of la Riunione Adriatica di Sicurtà, and in the vault of which other valuables, liturgical vessels, and paintings will find temporarily shelter in 1944. In the following years, the members of Capitolo, and in particular eminent representatives of the community, will invest both knowledge and money for the recataloguing of the library and the foundation of a museum, which now it's a big discussion beyond the scopes of this paper. But to return now to the present, for where I had started, the historical archive of the Greek community, being now under the auspices of Sobridendens as a cultural inheritance, has been systematically organized, and there is a new electronic index easily accessible online to the wider public. I should say, we also need to take into account that the history of the Greek presence in Trieste cannot be examined in full solely from the study of the documents of this archive. For their content, if limited to the activity and relations within the community, and material from other archives can provide us with significant information concerning the presence of the Greeks, as its Archivio di Stato, l'Archivio Comunale, and also the Archivio of the Greek consulate. where we can find, example, information for Greeks, as also Jews, the individuals for whatever reason were not mentioned by the Orthodox community. The archive of the Greek consulate of Trieste, which dates back to 1732, for that time for Ottoman subjects, for the moment is not easily accessible by the public. Nevertheless, part of this can be accessed at the archive of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The rest of it remains awaits thorough examination and classification. The future will show where this material will end up. As far as the community archive is concerned, the task of organization of the new electronic index in which I participated was based on the previous classification by a team of historians under the supervision of the honorary professor of the University of Athens, today honorary professor of the University of Athens, and my supervisor, Olga Katsiardi-Hering, who is here today. And as Professor Katsiardi herself states in the introduction of the Italian version of her book, the first research we have for the Greeks Trieste, for the first period until 1830, when she first went to the community and started her research in the small room of Cassaforte, there were only registers, the folders with the documents that had been classified by Constantinidis and libri di copia lettere. After persistent research, she found in a loft piled up in a disorganized fashion and covered in dust accounting books, catalogues, other material concerning the construction and decoration of the church and the function of schools. After transferring the material to a safer place within the building, she proceeded to an external thematic classification into 6 different categories related to the main functions of the community as a religious and charitable association and organization of legal representation of Greeks centered in Trieste. Those categories are economia, administration, school, church and Chiesa Cimitero, Fondazioni Lassiti, Camera di Commercio Ellenica. She provided a more hermeneutic approach of the archive, which does not exist in the respective indices of the archives of the Serbian community or the one of Jews, which were, of course, classified by the archivists who then restored the organic and typical order of the material. I should remark here that while the index of our community, as I said, is an electronic, accessible to all, the one of Serbian is none of them, neither the one of the Serbian community or the Jews exist as has an electronic index. Those of the Serbian community is also written in Cyrillic. For the Jewish community, there is an index in possession of the Sorbida data, but when I went to the community to ask to see that, they told me that there exists an index, but is reserved. To come to a conclusion, or more to what we can observe as an example, having as an example this the historical archive of the community. It's not the principles of the archival science and taxonomic methods. What is interesting is the different symbolism that the documents have or may acquire through handling them in different ways, or transferring them to a different material environment, like a different space or another collection, also the political or other implications connected to the different strategies, as we see for the other communities, of administration the archive as an institution. Thank you very much.